let's see how this works out. So, first off, like, one of my co-managers was like, hey, you should try, like, bumping up the engagement by, kind of being clickbaity. And I did that last night. And I don't know how much I like it. It's kind of not my personality. I don't know if I'm going to do it again. But anyway, to address certain things, because I'm just a dude that was kind of told to try out talking about his thoughts on fantasy football on the internet, and it seems like some people want to listen. So this is a theory channel on fantasy football. It's things how I see it, how I would attack it. I'm not perfect. I don't know everything. I don't. That's kind of ridiculous. But the idea that I kind of joke with my co-managers about, if there's a perfect form, a perfect strategy about how to break fantasy football to make your league mates just give up because they're like, you're going to win again this year. That's kind of my thought process. Like, one of my friends who I coach football with, he moved away. And we used to joke that part of the reason why we coach was to make fun of other people and show them how little they knew about football. I mean, I have a very disagreeable personality. So, like, to understand where I'm coming from when I talk about, like, there's guys, the troll farmers in the chat, that are leaving comments, they have poor listening comprehension. So anyway, let's just get into the meat and potatoes, somewhat addressing some of the trolls, because Eric July says, monetize your haters. So first and foremost, like, we have I won't bury the lead for those that want to just get in and out after you heard me ramble. Like, buy high trading. We'll get into trading a little bit later. You don't buy low and sell high. You buy high and you sell low. You need to get guys off your roster and you need to get guys onto your roster. And you win trades by losing them, right? And I'll get into that a little bit later. But those that care, like, how you replace Nick Chubb, you go buy Brian Robinson. That's the long and short of it. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but that's probably going to be the best way to go attack the Nick Chubb loss, or injury. So, to clarify the clickbait video that I put out yesterday, Pierre Strong is just cheaper to get than Jerome Ford's going to cost you. Like, I would have to put in every dollar that I have in Fab or have the number one waiver claim to get Jerome Ford. And there's no guarantees, because life is unfair. And I am not convinced of him as a prospect. I think he's fine. There's just not a large enough sample size to kind of know. And if I miss on Jerome Ford, I can stash Pierre Strong for nothing. Like, that's the fantasy football theory behind it. I get to find out for nothing while you get to pay, right? And it costs me nothing to find out, and everything that you have to put in on Ford. And yeah, in the leagues that I don't have Ford anywhere, I'm going to be putting my waiver claims in. I'm going to be putting my Fab bids in. I'm probably going to put in what I think Ford's worth, which is going to change from league to league. But again, this is your call. It's not mine. But yeah, in order to get a potential bell cow RB1, it's the boat. It's done. Like, the hole to fill, you fill it now, because there's no point waiting for the future. That is the general consensus on how to deal with it, right? How I'm going about my theory of fantasy football is the same way that I was able to land James Conner for free when Le'Veon Bell held out. It was also the same way that I got James Robinson for free as a rookie, because of that backfield situation. So I'm not saying I know everything, but, like, I'm trying to figure out the theory about how to win my leagues and make my league mates look funny and then take all their money. That's what I'm here to talk about. If you want to be successful, you have to take risks. That's in fantasy. If you do the same thing everybody else is doing, you're going to get the same outcome. I've said this before. In my auction league, my main money league, a couple guys came in with a strategy to buy the elite quarterbacks and ransom them back to people. And you may think that's stupid. You may not like it. But if it works and they do well, it's going to happen again, right? And I think the results are kind of in between. I was able to take an RB1 and package him, and get an elite quarterback back with an RB2. That's, and I think it worked out better for me. And obviously he presented the trade. So, like, that is a strategy. Again, I'm not going to say it was good or bad. It's just a theory, a strategy. So when we're talking about handcuffs, like there's a certain degree of risk mitigation that I can control by having a handcuff on my bench. Now, by handcuff, I'm not talking about just, to the certain trolls out there. I'm not just talking about my handcuff. I'm talking about other people's handcuffs, because there are only a certain amount of people on the wire at any given time that have enough value to be rostered. If they can't win me a game or they can't win me a league, they are not going to be on my roster. And I can't control the outcome of the games on Sunday, but I can mitigate my risk and maximize my reward by who I carry on my bench, right? And put in my lineup. So from a handcuff standpoint, if for those out there that aren't aware, like if a guy like Tony Pollard last year is biting at Zeke's heels, that's a guy I want to be rostering. Not all guys are created equal, so that means not everybody's handcuff needs to be on your bench. I shouldn't have to explain this to anybody, but like if I do, then I do. And there are certain guys, like Jerome Ford was one of those guys. I think I've talked about him in other videos before, but Jerome Ford was one of those guys. Like there's enough there with Jerome Ford to go, like, I should just be having him on my bench. Why I haven't talked about Jerome Ford as much was because, like, Nick Chubb is probably the best all around running back in football. And it should have been a no-brainer. There are other guys like Tajay Spears that are kind of coming out of nowhere that should be thought about, because if you didn't know about him ahead of time, you didn't know, right? And Tajay Spears may end up having standalone value regardless of him being quote unquote Derrick Henry's like handcuff. We're looking for league winners here. We're not kind of looking for like replacement level guys. I don't think that Cleveland's going to bring anybody. For those that couldn't understand the video, I don't think Cleveland's going to bring in anybody of value, because they would have done it already. That's the whole point of Jerome Ford. Again, handcuffs are a certain degree of risk mitigation. I'm repeating myself on my notes. Again, this is just how to run your roster. You do you, man. I ain't control you. The whole idea that I'm going to have not my handcuff because I'm going to have someone else's handcuff, like they're moot arguments. They cancel each other out. I'm going to carry who I think maximizes my ability to win my league. It may be your roster or your handcuff. It may be mine. It just depends on who's available on the waiver wire. Like I said, like guys like Tajay Spears and Jerome Ford should have been rostered in all leagues already. That are by people that are trying to win their leagues. There are less competitive leagues that have a lot more guys on their waiver wires, because guys understand the value of not having to go get their knives out on Tuesday nights and try and pry them away, by dropping all their fab. And if you're in a league that doesn't do it that way, again, like there's personalities to your league, and Jerome Ford in my main money league is on the wire. Like, oh well, like I could have rostered him ahead of time. I didn't. The Chubb owner didn't. That's just the way things go. So anyway, we'll get into it. So again, Pierre strong. It just costs me nothing. It basically costs me nothing to wait a week and see what the snap percentages are, how they dictate everything. And the other guy like Kendre Miller, it's going to cost me almost nothing to stash him on the bottom of my bench and see how the snap shares play out. Like I said, Tony Jones, I already said this in the other video. Tony Jones Jr. is not interesting to me, right? I don't think he's a league winner. Kendre Miller, there's that story that we can tell about how Kendre Miller is a league winner, or an RB2 at the very least. So there was another comment yesterday from someone that has poor listening comprehension about, I said that Bijan's not a 3-down back. Now, my justification behind that is, when we talk about like A-Chain here in a second, I'm not leaving Bijan in the game to pass block. I think that's stupid. And I don't want my fancy sports car being treated like a piece of body armor, right? I'm having Bijan run routes, and I'm trying to burn blitz coverage by having him matched up against the linebacker. That's what I do with Bijan. Roshan, I'm not doing the same way. I'm using Roshan as a brick wall. Like that's just how he goes. Like Roshan can pick up blitzes, Bijan burns the defenses. Roshan can run routes. It's just like they're kind of different how they're used. I'm not going to use a tank at the Indy 500, and I'm not going to use a sports car in war. Like this is just how they go. And again, 3-down skill set. What that translates to, in my mind, as a coach, is run, catch, and block. Bijan, it doesn't matter what I think about him as a pass blocker, he shouldn't be in the game. So when we talk about like Durham Smythe with the Dolphins, I see him more as a pass blocker. The same thing Dawson Knox being with the Bills. Like, they can pass block. Roster construction, why they're there. Dalton Kincaid is the pass catcher. Dawson Knox is the pass blocker. Bijan is the pass catcher. Roschon Johnson is the pass blocker. So, I want Bijan out and burning people. There's something called a green dog in football. It's where your linebacker blitzes for the. He's basically man-to-man with the running back, and he's blitzing to make sure the running back can't go out on a route. That's what you do a lot. So if I have Bijan in and he's my sixth pass blocker, I just green dog him all day long. And then there's a great play that's in week 1 where Patrick Mahomes made the Detroit Lions pay because they green dogged McKinnon, and Patrick Mahomes just put it on a dot to McKinnon, who ran a wheel out of the backfield. Like, there are ways to deal with these problems, but Desmond Ridder is not Patrick Mahomes. There you go. So moving on from that, Desmond Ridder, the Falcons offense is really well designed to get the ball to the right guys. Bijan on third down should basically be a slot receiver. He should not be a pass blocker. And I bring this up because, like, when we talk about, like, years ago, the worst play in the history of football, the Seahawks Broncos in the Super Bowl, like, just do what needs to be done. Do what you do well, design the plays correctly, win the game. Like, they say stupid things like, well, if we run it on first down, they know what we're going to do on second down. Who cares? Win the game. I'm going to punch you in the mouth until you give up. And I say this because, like, Pro Football Focus, because I listen to the same stuff you guys do. I read the same articles. Pro Football Focus said a few years ago that the analytics of football is changing. Like, it's more efficient to throw the football than it is to run the football. Great. I played football. I look at the stats. I'm a numbers guy. I do well in math. I can tell you from a football coaching standpoint, the analytics may tell you to go for it on fourth down, but you will demoralize your team if you don't get the first down. Like, put that in 2 numbers. Like, so when guys are like, oh, like, you don't watch games. I know what I'm looking for when I watch games. And we'll get to that later when we talk about, like, Zach Wilson. Your defense is going to play less good, and it is going to negatively influence all the further analytics on your team because you're a moron and you don't know how to actually coach. Like, there you go. You need to coach yourself out of a brown paper bag and do what your players do best, not what you want to do from a scheme standpoint. That's how football functions. So, like, when I make some of my comments, I can back them up if it's necessary. But since fantasy football is not real football, it's analytics and stats. And we'll get there when we get there. So I know some of you want to know about, like, trades, how I conduct my trades. What I have learned, and I put the horse in front of the cart, is do not buy low and sell high. Like, that's not what we do. Like, I buy high and I sell low. As an email pops up, a spam email. So, I saw Josh Jacobs' uses last year. I went in and I bought him. I overpaid for him, because that was what I want to look for, right? That's how you do your trades. There are a couple guys right now that are already saying overpay to go get these guys. I want your player. I want good players. I want to not have bad players, and I want to not have middle players. I want good players. Lose the trade so you can make your team better. I also need to sell my underperforming players for whatever they're worth to get them off my roster, because they have very little value. And if I see that happening, I need to get rid of them. And we'll talk about that with Garrett Wilson, because my mind has changed between 2 days of watching tape, right? So again, in fantasy football, the biggest thing is opportunity is king, efficiency is queen. Guys are either going to figure it out or they won't, but, like, we can look at the numbers and see what direction they're going at. Eventually, teams will stop scheming up guys opportunities if they can't pay it off. Like, that's just how football works. And if we can look at the numbers and we can find the numbers will tell us what direction we need to go in. So, like, another good example of this is, like, Brock Purdy. And it's not unfair to compare Brock Purdy to Tom Brady. Is a very flawed player, but he's very good at football, and the Niners put him in a position to be successful. So on that offense, like they have these weapons in Kittle and Debo, and Ayuk, and we don't know who's going to go out play every week. And I've talked about this before. Like those guys are detrimental to fantasy lineups because like you just don't know when they're going to go off, and you have to design your roster a certain way because there's a non-zero chance that Kyle Juszczyk, their fullback, is going to have one or more fantasy relevant weeks. And you're just never going to really be able to know that from our perspective. And the same thing with like Chase and Higgins. Like, are they sell lows right now? Like, I don't know. Maybe there's reasons behind what's going on, but they also present the problem of knowing which week it's going to be their week, right? And again, I bring this up because like JJ kind of decided a lot of leagues last year in the finals, and some of that's predictable and some of it's not. And if I would have told you that ahead of time, like I don't think anybody would have believed me, and you wouldn't have benched him. I had him in the finals, and man, like that hurt. Like that he put up like 2.2. So we're looking at these numbers because the numbers are predictable. And what goes on the field. Oh man, like Jerome Ford's like really good at football because I watched him cut back up across the field and put up 69 yards on one carry. Like I don't care about that. I care about the 2.46 that he put up the rest of the game. Like because like I could talk about green dogs all day long, but we're here for fantasy football, right? So so the first guy that I want to talk about, like you need to get, or I'm going to go look at to go buy, is Zay Flowers. So Zay Flowers did. Let me see if I can pull him up after good old Pierre Strong. So Zay Flowers, he did 84 and 80 or 77% snaps. He's been targeted downfield. So he had 10 targets, 9 receptions, 5 targets, 4 receptions. But his big reception last week was like a 50-yarder. So he's doing all the dink and dunk stuff, but they're also going to send him vertical. So like those are the things that I like to go confirm what the targets look like. After I see that the targets are there, the opportunity is there. Is there going to be efficiency? So in a game that he doesn't get 10 targets, can he still make my fantasy day by having a 50-yard catch? The answer, it looks like it. So what is a guy going to make you give up to get a Zay Flowers right now? And how much do you have to overpay to get that guy? Because you should be overpaying, or I will be overpaying if I can get a deal done for Zay Flowers, right? Another guy to look at is Marvin Mims in relation that had a very similar stat line. Marvin Mims is only running 27 and 24% rounds right now. So Marvin Mims, I can go buy Zay Flowers, but Marvin Mims is a guy I can stash at the bottom of my bench and watch the snap share go up. And they may end up being the same player because they profile very similar. So B-Rob, and I'll bring him up for you guys to look at as I try and actually be, somewhat functional as a YouTuber. So Brian Robinson, the big thing to look at is he's only at 61 and 52% snaps. That's not good. But his other numbers are kind of like Josh Jacobs. He's got the attempts. He actually profiles, as I actually have him pulled up. He's 6'1", almost 6'2", 225, runs that 4.53. Those are very similar metrics to Josh Jacobs. The Raiders offense last year was not particularly good. The Washington offense this year is not going to be particularly good, but it doesn't mean that they're bad. And again, okay offenses with great players are what we want to buy. And if you hear a helicopter, I apologize, but what am I going to do about it? I don't control helicopters. So anyway, moving forward from that, B-Rob is the guy to go out. And if a guy that has Brian Robinson on the roster, like they haven't comped their team for him. So he's either moving into a position because a guy has lost a guy like Chubb, which means he's going to be his RB1 and good luck going and getting him. Or, his RB2 hasn't worked out, so he slotted him into his RB2 slot. Or he's like, hey, maybe I should get a hold of this trade, and he's putting him into his flex. So I can look at that and go, like, he hasn't created an attachment to him. I can make an overbid on his guy. He has to make a business decision if he thinks he's got this year's Josh Jacobs, or if he's just gonna sell his stock early and get whatever he can get for him. So like I can put together like a trade with an RB2 and a wide receiver 3, or a wide receiver or running back 3 and a wide receiver 2, and I can see if he bites, because that's what you got to do. You got to overpay. You got to make it so good that the guy is going to have he has to at least think about it to get a guy like B-Rob. So the next guy to bring up is good old Mike Evans. Now his snap share was down this week, and the game was a little funky. But again, like I already pointed out, like some of the guys that we thought were going to be good are going to be bad. Some of the guys that we thought were going to be bad are going to be good. And that's offenses and defenses. So Mike Evans did 84% snaps first week. He had 61% last week, but he looks good. Baker Mayfield may be a thing. The Bucs are probably not going to be able to tank for Caleb Williams. Why? Because they've already won 2 games, right? So like, Mike Evans is a guy to go out there and get, and he's a guy that may have gone in some leagues as a replacement level guy. So again, if I can look at a guy and I can make an offer on a guy that a guy's like, man, I can sell high and I can get a guy high and I can put him into my lineup. These are guys that I want to be buying. And then the final guy of the buy high, sell low list is Michael Pittman. As I pull up the wrong guy, Michael Pittman with the Colts. So he's 97% snaps, 98% snaps, 11 targs and 12 targs. The efficiency was down a little bit last week. His actual usage may go up this week, be more efficient if Gardner Minshew's in the game. But like the targets are wide receiver 1 targets. The efficiency may not be, but that's still buying a wide receiver 2 out of a range where guys were probably buying their wide receiver 2. So that they can sell out on the guy and move on with a better offer, and you're upgrading your lineup. So like that's my advice, because those are the guys I'm actively working on myself. So moving on after that to whether or not you should be selling Garrett Wilson. Well, I watched the Zach Wilson tape, and I will pull it up and I will let you guys watch it today. So there's 2 throws to be to look at with Zach Wilson. First of all, Zach Wilson actually played okay against the Cowboys, considering how bad the pass rush was. The Jets offensive line was already an issue coming into the season with Aaron Rodgers. The Cowboys may be the best defense in football, so the pass rush didn't do him any favors, and he actually looked pretty well. Like last year, he was just scrambling for the sake of scrambling. This year, he was manipulating the pocket. Those are good things. There was a lot of drops, so part of the reason why Breece Hall had a really bad game was because Breece Hall dropped the football. I still didn't like his usage, but he dropped the football. Like Dalvin Cook is not necessarily cooked, but he's not being used correctly. That's coaching. That's another good indicator that like maybe I should get away from this offense, right? Zach Wilson looks like a serviceable NFL quarterback, right? And the Jets are never probably going to be good on offense. They're probably never going to be the type of team that's designed to play from behind. Dalvin Cook, and I have this written down in my notes, Dalvin Cook lost them the game when he fumbled, right? And he's more of a grinder now, and he would fit well with Breece Hall. But that was the fumble that sealed the game, and that was like late in the 3rd quarter. Zach Wilson's 3 picks in the game. One was really bad. That was like 3 minutes left to go. He just totally missed on a check down. The other one was a guy he missed on the sideline when he was scrambling. The second one of the day, Garrett Wilson's fault. And again, I'm not saying any of them none of them were Zach Wilson's fault, even though I just did. But the idea behind it is, if the ball hits a receiver's hands, it's the receiver's fault, and it hit Garrett Wilson's hands. And Garrett Wilson should have finished with a stat line of like five or 6 catches on 8 targets, and he didn't, and there were drops. But let's see. When Zach Wilson made his, threw his picks, the game was basically over. There was another throw that looked like he shot putted the football, and I finally found the right angle, and it was tipped. And that was a Garrett Wilson touchdown. So if you're wondering what's going on there, so on this play, if you're looking at home, and I'm going to try and show it to you, you see that Zach Wilson scrambles, and this is pretty, and then Allen Lazard just doesn't get his foot down, like that's not on Garrett Wilson. Zach Wilson, that's on Allen Lazard. That's a professional receiver not being a professional. So like, and this is late in the game, and this could potentially put them back in a scoring opportunity. So the other throw to look at, and this is the Garrett Wilson drop, is on this one. Zach Wilson is a tick late, and this is part of Zach Wilson's big problem is he's a tick late processing information. But this is a nice throw into this window. And on the other replay, you can actually see Garrett Wilson checks where the safety is, and then goes back to try and catch the football. And at this point, Garrett Wilson either needs to go make a contested catch or play defense. And Garrett Wilson kind of does neither, and the safety takes the football away. So like you can see it on this play, he checks, he finds him, he braces for contact. So instead of knocking the pick away or making the play, he does neither, and that's a knock on the player. So anyway, we'll move on from that. Hopefully that works out for everybody. If you're wondering about defenses to pick up after the wire closes, simple metric, good D at home against bad offense. This is the main purpose for the wire. As the season goes on, you should be stashing your Ds and you should be spending your money on your defenses to be planning more than 1 week ahead to put these guys on the bottom of your waivers. But right now we're in the arms race and we just want those weapons to try and get them to work out. So I'm going to repeat myself again with opportunity is the king. And past behavior is best indicator of future behavior. I just have this written down as my notes because you guys are making me put out some effort. So other guys to be looking at, like I shouldn't have to tell you to go spend your money on Jerome Ford or Nico Collins or even Sam Laporta if he's available. Josh Reynolds is another guy, like if he's available in your league. These are the guys that I miss on, and I'll explain to you why I miss on some of these guys. It's because like the guys that are appropriately valued that have a limited avenue towards league winning upside, I kind of tend to ignore. And this is what I was sending out trade offers to my co-managers that they could look at. And one of them literally said, are we being cute? Because we're putting up 150 points a week. Why are we making moves? So the idea is I'm trying to upgrade those middle of the road guys, and I just tend to ignore them. Sam Laporta is an ignorable guy to me, but he can do well on a lot of people's rosters. The way I see Detroit's passing game is I'm never going to be able to predict the Sam Laporta weeks. They have Josh Reynolds, they have the Sun God, they have Gibbs, they have Jameson Williams is going to come back. Sam Laporta has to fit in there someplace, and I'm never going to be able to predict that, right? And the same thing with Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds is, he's 28, he's old, he's, somewhere between their wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2, depending on like if the Sun God's going to play this week. He has value. I just don't know when I'm going to be able to predict that as the season goes on, and he could just completely fall out, or he could win you your games coming up. And this is a guy I just ignore. And it's the same thing when I talk about like a Zach Moss. Anthony Richardson's the number one running back in Indianapolis when he's healthy. He's also their red zone back. These are the things that you need to have in a running back. Zach Moss's production came later in the game when Gardner Minshew came in, and you're going to get a kind of a different style of offense with Minshew in the game than Anthony Richardson. So I just tend to ignore Zach Moss's, and I know that the monster of their running back, drawing a blank, Jonathan Taylor's coming. So like Moss right now, he's probably, if Minshew plays, he's probably a high end RB2. If that could fall into the end zone. If he doesn't play, he may almost be unrosterable or unplayable because Anthony Richardson is going to score 2 touchdowns in like 7 minutes, right? So the other thing that you hear some of the other guys talk about from a fantasy perspective is the juice. Like, oh, this guy doesn't have juice. This guy has juice. This guy's dust. I don't care about any of that because they don't translate into numbers, right? Like Hollywood Brown can run a 4.3, but the best he's ever done from a fantasy perspective is put up like wide receiver 3 numbers. I don't care. I care about what guys do on the field to the points on my fantasy sheet, and how they get there. I don't always need to care about, Zach Wilson, isn't as bad as people are making him out to be. I don't care about that, unless I'm trying to figure out how the Jets are running their offense. And in this case I did, because like I went from, hey, maybe we should use Garrett Wilson as trade bait to maybe we should be a little bit hesitant of just getting him off our roster. Right. So Sam Laporta versus Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid will have his weeks. They will be more predictable than Sam Laporta because Dalton Kincaid will function as a de facto number 2 some weeks. Some weeks he's not, and last week was a Gabe Davis week, but some weeks he's going to be the de facto number 2. And in reality, unlike Sam Laporta, there are chances that Gabe Davis, like last week, who was the de facto number 1, Dalton Kincaid will be the de facto number 1, and he will have that massive spike week, because when teams take away the other guys and they go beat you with Dalton Kincaid, That's why Dalton Kincaid may have more value than Sam Laporta, because I have to be able to look at Sam Laporta and go, when will he be the number one? Can I find a way to make Sam Laporta the number one in Detroit? And I don't ever see that happening. That's why Luke Musgrave, to me, and I can bring up Luke Musgrave for those that are wondering. Luke Musgrave in Green Bay with what's his face, Jordan Love. Luke Musgrave's actual snap percentage went up this week. So I have some questions about how that offense is going to run and how efficient Jordan Love's going to be. But Luke Musgrave's snap share went up from 75 to 88. Now, why is this important from a fantasy perspective? Because Luke Musgrave still has a story to tell about how he's the number one receiver in Green Bay, which is something Sam Laporta is probably not going to be able to do. It's also something that Dalton Kincaid's not going to be able to do. So when we look at like a Luke Musgrave's path towards fantasy, and he still has rather high yards per catch. When we look at a guy like Zach Ertz and we talk about quote unquote the juice, well, Zach Ertz is on a bad offense, right? So Zach Ertz he's old, he's on a bad offense. I can probably pick up Zach Ertz. He's up there from a fantasy perspective when it comes to being able to be fantasy relevant. So I pull up good old Zach Ertz for you. He's up there with like 10 targets and 8 targets, not particularly great yards per catch. He's a guy that I can probably wait and pick up late off the wire, and I'm not going to have to get in a knife fight from him, because I don't think there's ever going to be a Zach Ertz spike week that's going to win me a week single-handed. And it's not that he's bad. It's just those middle of the road guys I just tend to ignore. So I already talked about Zach Moss. Other things to talk about is like 1 week starters. I have a very hard time finding these guys. I remember a couple years back, I missed on the opportunity to block with Wayne Gallman. Wayne Gallman had a very inefficient day, but he had like 2 receiving touchdowns, cost me the week, right? I'm not good at looking at those guys. And that's one of the things I try and get better about is the blocks. Like the blocks are a big deal. Because if you missed out on Kyren Williams, but your opponent had him, you probably lost your week. And that's even if not knowing what Kyren Williams is going to do with 95% snaps. So we're trying to focus on winning our weeks. If I can burn my fab, or I can burn my my waiver wire claim to make sure that I block to win a week, I can't get that week back. That's important. It doesn't really matter what you or I think of the guy. It has entirely to do with if my opponent is going to take advantage of him, and what does it cost me. $25 a fab to guarantee a win is a good trade-off, right? So other guys that I missed on so far, Mostert, if he may be a league winner. That backfield's way too messy for my eyes. I put my money on A-Chain. I think he's a great prospect. Obviously, the Dolphins think that Mostert's the great prospect. Opportunity is king. He has the opportunity. A-Chain doesn't matter why I think it. I'm wrong. That's the way the backfield shook out. And if you have Mostert, congratulations. And it's the same thing with Roschon. Like I picked the wrong guy on the backfield's going to shake out. It looks like Roschon is the guy to have. So again, congratulations. But those are the reasons why I miss my guys with my process. And again, this is my process of how I get to where I get to. As I said before, like we're trying to avoid those running back twos and those wide receiver twos because they don't win leagues. But they won't lose you leagues. But what they will do is they will allow you to put together an offer to go get a Brian Robinson that may be this year's Josh Jacobs, right? Those are the things that we're looking at. So the other two things, guys to pick up, I talked to you yesterday in the video with Eric Gray, the Giants running back. Breda is probably going to cost you money. I think Brightwell's just like a guy like Tony Jones Jr. I tend to think the Giants should learn and keep Barkley out. They say he's going to miss 3 weeks. Well, there's a reason why they're saying 3 weeks, because if it was 4 weeks, he would go on IR, and they don't want to put him on IR right now. That's why they're saying 3 weeks, because the moment they say 4 weeks, he's going on IR. So again, like I'm probably not going to spend fab on Breda. A lot of people aren't going to spend fab on Breda, but I will look at Eric Gray, because Eric Gray gives me that upside to give me those spike weeks that I would want more than maybe Breda in a timeshare. And I talk about, like, I don't do well with guys that are appropriately valued in the draft, because that means that, like, their range of outcomes is just as likely to burn me as it is for me to get a league winner out of them. And knowing when to cut bait on those guys can be difficult because, again, someone may take a look at Brian Robinson, as I bring up Brian Robinson so you don't have to look at Sleeper. Someone may be able to look at Brian Robinson and say, I have gotten out of him what I think he's worth. I'm ready to move on. So, I don't have to talk about Nico Collins, but I will. I looked at the tape. Those are sustainable routes. They're inside breaking routes. They're not low efficient plays to the edges. Bear in mind, it's still going to be a bad offense. It may get incrementally better as the season goes on. That's what we'd like to see with Shroud. But like, you're putting your bid in on Nico Collins to kind of be more a flex play or a replacement play, or even like a wide receiver 2 is probably more wise than to think that like these are going to be sustainable. But the idea is, when I watch the tape, they are sustainable. They are targets that they can move him around the formation and find and get him the football. And those are what we want. We want great players on okay offenses. That's a guy that showed the ability for the offense to manipulate how they're going to try and get him the ball, instead of just saying like, oh, throwing up their hands and going, I don't know how to get him there. Right. Tank Dell, he had some use this week. He's a stash if he clears waivers. Wide receiver 3s probably don't win you your leagues. But he's another guy with like your Marvin Mims that if they clear waivers, we can wait a week. We can see what the snap share does. To show you, if you're wondering, because I didn't write this down and I should in the future. He did 48% snaps week 1, 79% snaps week 2, and then he had 10 targets. But those are things that we want to be stashing. Like, those are the things that I like to stash when I see those upticks. Those are the upticks that we want to see, or that I like to see before I put my money where my mouth is. And I can probably get him for free. So Matt Stafford roasted the Niners, and it's a good thing that he hasn't thrown touchdown passes. The passing volume is there, so I can stash him at the bottom of my bench. And if he's a high enough volume passer, he's going to be able to compete with the nimbly bimbly guys. And if he can do it against the Niners, he can probably do it against anybody. And he was out there just roasting. And if a Matt Stafford Puka stack doesn't sound like such a bad thing. Rashid Shaheed, he's a guy I've had people ask about before, like what I think, and I think he's good. But I think it's a crowded backfield, or a crowded wide receiver room. He did 54% snaps week 1, 49% snaps week 2. 6 targets, 4 targets, high efficiency, which is great, right? So he's a guy that we can be stashing at the bottom of our bench, and we're hoping that he starts cutting into Michael Thomas's role, because he ain't cutting into Chris Olave's, and that offense is only going to be okay. And these are the things that like I don't predict well, because like what's the best I'm gonna get out of Rashid Shaheed is wide receiver 3 maybe. But like these are the things that other people tend to notice that I don't. And then I already talked about Pierre Strong, Kendre Miller. And again, like the worst that's going to happen with Kendre Miller down the line is that he gets into a timeshare with Alvin Kamara. What's his face? I don't even see. Oh yeah, I'm gonna pull him up. I don't see. Jamal Williams, the current meta in the NFL right now for hamstrings is a week late instead of a week early. Kendre Miller is dealing with a hamstring. Who knows on that? But again, I've kind of talked about roster construction stuff. There are reasons why they pull some of this stuff. And, so Kendre Miller, like, he's a stash because he's probably more than likely going to be the guy that is splitting time with Kamara eventually. And he's going to cost me nothing to stash on my bench and see the snap share go up, see the opportunity go up. And then Sam Howell. I mean, I said if he's bad against Arizona, he's probably not usable. Denver's D may be like really bad. They kind of didn't look very good. He did make this a really amazing throw to Scary Terry late in the game that probably like a handful of guys in the league could do. He's nimbly bimbly. he's definitely like, if I'm stashing Stafford, I'm looking at stashing Hal. Kind of going to depend on like what your league looks like. But yeah, that's about all I got for today. And I did it in 40 minutes. So hopefully you guys like it.